they were almost black. You know, they just varnished over kept varnishing over the floors. Then Petey and I telling about how I met Petey. And I was 10 years old when my folks moved up on what they call Bone Hill on the north side of Portage. And Petey lived at 507 Volk Street, and we moved into 311 Volk Street. So from 10 years, he went to the Lutheran school. I didn't go. I went to the public school. So, but I knew him all the time, and he became a very good friend of my brothers. I had 3 brothers, and he became a very good friend of theirs. And he'd often stop. The boys all set up pins at the bowling alleys to make a little money, and I got to know him real well. And at 16 years old, I had a birthday party, the first birthday party I ever had in my life. But he brought me a beautiful box of candy. It's a wooden box, beautiful. I still have it. I kept my handkerchiefs in it all these years, and it had a mirror on the back of it. And from 16 on, I was Petey's sweetheart. And so we walked to high school together almost every day. And we had, while the boys were all home, we had a bobsled that carried 17 of us. And we lived way up at the top of the hill, and we'd go 4 blocks with that bobsled in the wintertime. And they kept changing off. The one had to stand at the bottom of the hill to make sure there wasn't a car coming, because we had to cross one highway. And of course, you might have a car in an hour in those days. Yeah. But that was our entertainment. And then in the wintertime, and of course went skating on Silver Lake. And when in the summertime, we played what they called Ducky on the Rock. And they had great big rocks on the corners up under the arc lights, they called them at that time. And that I've forgotten how the game went, but we all played, and there were so many kids that lived there. And Ruth Burgess, who just passed away about a month ago from over at Bearville, she was one of my very best friends, and Margaretta. I knew Margaret at that time too, because we went to Sunday school together, and so we were always pals through every grade in school and through high school. And when Margaretta became engaged to Eddie, who she was married to for quite a few years, then she moved to Chicago, and Petey and I used to go down every chance that we could to see them, and they'd come up to Swan Lake here, and we had a wonderful, wonderful time together for many, many years. And Margaretta and Eddie brought their friends. Red and Helen McComb would come up and stay at the cottage, and then there was another couple that, I can't think of their name, that always came up, and the gang of us would go together. And then when we'd go down to Chicago, the 8 of us would go out together, and we'd take in some of the nightclubs, and none of us had any money at that time, and but we had a wonderful time. And that's how I met Pete. And we'd walk to school every day together, and that was in 1925 when I graduated from high school. He had already graduated and was working, and we went together. We went together for about 7 years, and we got married in 1930, and we just lacked 3 weeks of having 67 years together.
67.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Your anniversary is when? Your anniversary is
My
when?
anniversary is May 8th, 1930.
Okay, so you got married the month after Mother.
Your
did.
mother got married the 12th of April, the month
right.
before.
Mm.
Did you go to that wedding?
Oh, I sure did go to that wedding. And Margaretta came to mine. Eddie couldn't come because he was working, but Margaretta came.
I didn't know you though when I first came into the family.
Yeah, I met you when you were engaged to Harold. Before you married him, I met you.
You did?
Over to Aunt Mabel.
Ask Hazel these questions because she does much better.
I did. And I thought you were a sweet-looking lady.
No,
There we go.
I haven't got a quarter with me.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can remember the main points of the good times we had here in Portage with you guys. See, we didn't live, well, we did for 2 years after.
Yes.
We were 2 years in Michigan and didn't see you too much then. And then we were here for 2 years. And then in Janesville for the next 5 years.
But
And-
when you were in Portage the 2 years, we had, when you were having your babies, you had, both the boys were born in Portage, weren't they?
No,
I
Harold
was
was
born in
born
Iron
in
Mountain.
Michigan.
Oh.
Iron Mountain, Michigan.
But I know you had two.
He cost $35.
Well, let me tell you
I have
that
the bill to prove it.
Yeah.
Party.
I was in the hospital 11 days with Bob when Bob was born, and he was circumcised, and the nurses taking care of him, and my whole hospital bill was $52.
Oh,
1930. And I didn't have a gas stove or an electric stove. I had an oil stove out in the back shed where I heated all the water. And I had to get up at 3 o'clock on Monday morning and heat the water and do my washing and hang it outside. And if it was cold weather, everything was stiff as a board in about 5 minutes. And I had to do all my washing over the scrub board and
Yeah.
boil my diapers for him in a boiler on the stove. And I'll tell you, we did not have it easy.
Is
No.
that the house that was across the street from the one that was right on the lake? The house you're telling about now?
It was down in the middle of the block across the street.
Yeah, across
Yes,
the street. I
uh-huh.
remember that.
And
the first house I remember you had was right near that filling station on the far
yes, well, that was later.
little bungalow.
That was nice. That was a nice home.
Yeah.
That was, we lived in this other one 5 years, and then we moved down there. And then Mr. Stafford lived in the house that we bought on the lake. Staffords lived, and they were a couple who went to Florida every winter. And when in the summertime or during the day, when I would take Bob out for a ride in the buggy, Mrs. Stafford said, "Oh, come on and visit with me." So I would take him into Stafford's driveway, and I would visit with her. And when all of a sudden one day there was a rap at the door where we lived, and it was Mr. Stafford. He said, "We're going to sell our house." Petey was there too. "We're going to sell our house, Petey and Hazel, and I know you both love it there on the lake, and we'd like to have you buy it." Well, we said we'd love to have it, but we didn't have any money. $100 would be the most we could pay down on a down payment. And I said, so Petey said, I'm sorry, Bill, he said, but we just don't have any money. We didn't have. Petey earned $99 a month, and I didn't work, and we had to live on that, and that didn't take long for that to go. Sometimes we would have 10 cents left for pay. He only got paid once a month, and we'd have 10 cents left before payday. And Bob was little then, and we had a car, and we would take a ride around. Bob would always say, "Let's ride around the loop," and we'd go around downtown and get a nickel ice cream cone, and that was the extent of our spending money because we didn't have it. Well, It went on for a few months, and Bill Stafford came again. And he said, Petey, you're going to have my house. I don't care if you got a penny to pay down, you're going to have it. So we took the house, and we had about $200 to pay down on it, and he sold it to us for $3,500. And he said, you can have it for $25 a month, just pay it into the First National Bank, and he said, we'll keep track of it, and he said, I won't charge you any interest.
Oh my God.
Well, Mrs. Stafford, Mrs. Stafford said, oh yes, I want 4% interest. And that was pretty high for that time. But we got the house paid. That was in 1938 when we moved in. We got it paid for in 1946. Because I was able, when Bob was 5 years old, I was able to go to work because he went to school, and when he got out of school, he went to Grandma Kohls', you know, and until Petey and I got through working, and that helped us. Then my working helped us get the house paid for. But we, the day we moved into the house, the roof leaked. He didn't tell us he needed a new roof.
That was an extra.
I cried. I can remember that. So the roof leaked. I said, where are we going to get the money to put a new roof on? But we managed. Our peeper was a building up at Camp Douglas. He was putting new barracks up there for, see, that it wasn't long before the war in 1941, you know. So he was building the barracks up there, and he said he was a good friend of Petey's, and he said, I'll put your roof on, he said, for just very little money, he said, and I got extra shingles from up at Camp Douglas, and I'll just... So we had a roof like they had up at Camp Douglas. So that's how we got the new roof on. And then the floors had all been varnished over till they were almost black. You know, they just varnished over kept varnishing over the floors. Then Petey and I stripped all the floors in the house, and I got a terrible splinter in this finger, and I had one in there for 12 years before it came out. 12 years that splinter finally came out of my finger. And then we had Bob Abel, who ran the bowling alley, come up and sand the floors after we got them all stripped. So we had a nice carpeting, or nice floors. But we didn't ever get carpeting until 1956. That was 26 years after we were married.
Well, even that was
But
early.
Petey and I, before we got married, Petey and I had all our furniture paid for, and so we didn't have to have any payments on anything like that. That's why we went together 7 years, because so we'd have everything paid for.
And how old were you when you got married?
Huh?
How old were you when you got married?
23, and he was 26.
What was your first job, Hazel? Who did you go to work for?
That was what?
Who did you work for in your first job?
I went to work for the Columbia. My first job was 6 months in the shoe factory, and I was learning to be an edge stitcher, and I was getting up to $19 a week doing that. And then H.B. Rogers, who was head of the Columbia County Abstract at that time, said to my dad that he had a job open at the Abstract office. And so Dad told me about it, and Margaret Maitland was the head gal at that time down there, who was my Sunday school teacher at the Methodist Church. And so I went to talk to her, and she was so tickled that I was going to come to work there. And I worked, my first paycheck was $40. I worked for $40 a month for about 10 years. And then I finally asked him for a raise, and I got $65. Then when Uncle Ed became the Register of Deeds in Portage, he wanted me to come and work for him. And so I told Mrs. Grant, who owned the abstract office, I said, if I don't get more money, I'm going to leave. She immediately raised me to $115 a month. I got a raise. And I worked there for 52 years. When Margaretta married Eddie, her father and mother owned the cottage that Joanne and Forrest have, and many a party we had out there. And we'd come out here a lot in the summertime to be with Eddie and Margaretta, and then they'd bring their friends from Chicago, and we had gorgeous parties out there. The boys would all go fishing and drinking, and
Probably more.
they would go
I
up
bet
to,
no fish.
they would go up to Buffalo Lake, Eddie and Petey, and when they'd come back, that old Buick was just steaming. And we never knew when they were coming. And then we'd play poker with Ernie Merle, and he didn't like to get beat. Ernie didn't like to get beat. So he wouldn't play all evening. Swan Lake is just home to me.
Yes.
Now Gladys, let's hear from you.
Mine isn't half as interesting. You just keep right on
storyteller,
with
Hazel.
what
I can remember everything. I can.
I know,
I
you're
just
just-
have a
you're
wonderful
just-
memory of everything. And
Well.
I sit and think about those days so many times when I'm sitting there alone. All the fun we had.
Yeah.
And Eddie and Margaretta came to Florida. We went down the first year in 1970. Gasoline was 17 cents a gallon down in Florida.
Oh my God, she remembers that.
Yeah, 17 cents a gallon. And they rented a mobile in one I can't think, Blue something, park, and we were over on Highway 60 in Clearwater, but we got together every day down there, and we'd go some here and there and everywhere. I felt so bad when Eddie died, because the next year he wanted to come down again, and he died in February.
Did your folks come down and spend time in Florida before, while they were still able to?
They were just down there one winter,
Well, I thought they were there too.
Yeah, they were there too.
I think they were there too.
2 years.
And
And then Petey and Eddie
went.
went out on the ocean and fishing on one of the big boats out of Clearwater.
Yeah.
And Margaretta and I went shopping while they were gone. And when they came back, they had some nice fish and all clean. We went over to Eddie and Margaretta's cottage, and Margaretta fried the fish, and we had fish.
He had fish fry.
Yeah.
Those were the good days.
Those were the good old days. I've got some pictures of us down there.
Tell us about when Bob was born. Anything special about his arrival, a difficult delivery, or...
Well, I'll tell you this much. I never went to see a doctor before he was born. I keep away from doctors as much as I can, and I still
You sound like Andy Wooster.
do. Never went to a doctor. And it was almost time for him to be born, so I thought I better get a doctor. So I went up to see Dr. McGregor, and he said, "Oh, you better come for an examination next week." In the meantime, Bob was born.
Where was Bob born?
He
Hazel?
was born up at the Divine Savior's Hospital.
Oh, was that the hospital?
And I never had to buy any kind of a pregnant suit. Half the people didn't know I was pregnant. You know, I must have a lot of room in there. And when I got on the table up at the hospital, Doc McGregor says, "Whatever you have isn't going to be very much." And it scared me. I thought I had visions of a little baby on a pillow or something, you know. And when he was born, he weighed 7 pounds and 11 ounces. Doc McGregor said, "I only want to know one thing, Hazel. Where in hell did you have him?"
Oh, Jesus.
So,
I think first babies are apt to be that way because when I went to the hospital with Harold, they said the same thing. They didn't know where I had the baby.
Yeah.
I wasn't that big.
I
But
didn't
nowadays,
show it. I
girls-
didn't have to have any dresses or different clothes or anything. So I worked up until almost the time he was born. So
But then you said you were in the hospital 11 days? Is that
11 days they kept you. The 10th day they let you get up. They always said the 9th day all your bones went back where they should be. They always said that. And they kept you in bed until you couldn't. You were weak, you know. And then the 11th day I got up, and when I was going to go home, they had the measles at our apartment. So the doctor didn't want me to go into the measles with a new baby, so I went up to Aunt Mabel's. And I
remember
I
her
slept
talking
in
about that.
old Grandma Repholz's bedroom.
And Mabel used to tell the story about Bob laying on the table.
On the
you were
table, and he
bathing him.
piddled, and it went way back way back over his head. Carl Warren roomed there, you know, and he was a school teacher. He said, "Wait till I get Bob in school and tell him that."
You were the guy that piddled on the tulips.
That piddled on the Aunt Mabel's dining room table.
She had these glass bouquet of tulips there.
Yeah, she had, yeah. She said Bob piddled, he watered the tulips. So then
Some guys will do anything for a little bit.
Can't you just hear Mabel, you know, when she was telling all things like that, she would laugh. At
when she slammed that jack of hearts down at the right bower, he said, "Ha ha ha!"
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But she was nobody like Aunt Mabel. She welcomed every one of us, any time of day or night. She was a wonderful aunt.
Did Reverend Harris marry you also?
No, I was married at the Lutheran parsonage.
Okay.
Because Petey went to the Lutheran church. And
Yeah,
that's how you got-
I said church is church to me.
Yeah.
I can't afford to support two churches. We couldn't, so we went to Petey's church. And I always enjoyed it. Everybody welcomed me with open arms, and I was the secretary of this and the secretary of that in all of the, like the Luther Circle and everything that we went to. And we had that outside fireplace in our backyard, and of course every picnic they had, they were always over at Petey Kohls' house.
Well, I came over to Portage with a group of girls from Baraboo. I lived in Baraboo, and I was working in the office at that time. And we came over to hear Wayne King, who was playing at the old curling rink.
Oh, we had so many beautiful old dance
Yes.
bands that came to Portage.
Those are the times when the dance bands used to travel around the country. There were more than one, of course. And Harold was there with a group of fellows, and he asked my girlfriend, Grace Rulin, to dance first. I was second fiddle. And she danced with him, and then I danced with him, and somehow he took me out on the riverbank. I don't remember exactly how.
that night, you mean?
That night, yeah.
Oh.
And then there was the levee. Isn't the
Yes,
levee
the
down
levee.
around there? Yeah. And anyway, he wanted to take me to the Elks Club dance, which was the next night, or maybe 2 nights after that. It was on a Saturday night anyway. And I said, well, I can't go to the dance with you because I don't know you. And I didn't. Harold Rebholz meant nothing to me, except I did remember that he was a football player. And he said, I'll have my mother call your mother to make it all right. I said, well, you don't need to do that because I don't think I can go, and we'll just leave it at that. And he had his mother call my sister, I think it was, because I was staying with her at the time. So what could I do but go to the dance?
Did you have a good time?
Yes, he was a beautiful dancer.
Oh, he was a
In
good
fact, he
dancer.
was the best dancer I've ever danced
He was a good
with.
dancer, and the Pythian sisters, Aunt Mabel belonged to the Pythian sisters, and so did Grandma Merle's.
Yeah.
And boy, could they ever step it off up there, those two. And I used to go up there. Petey never cared about things like that, but I went to the dances up there with Margaretta, and we had a wonderful
Well, I
time.
think those ladies were the ones that taught Harold to dance.
Oh, they
I
were
don't know
good
about
dancers.
Russ.
Aunt Mabel and Grandma Merle's were good dancers.
But anyway, Harold could dance and he could sing. He was a beautiful singer, and he was good looking. And what else? He was an athlete, and isn't that enough to turn any girl's head?
How old were you at the time?
I was 19, and I was working in the law office, and I had only been out of high school for 3 years. And they didn't want me to go away to college right away because I was only 16 when I graduated from high school. That's where I made my mistakes. So,
But they
'cause
didn't
I
think
have a
so much
whole
about
family
college
of
in those
college
days either.
grads.
I say they didn't think so much about going to college
I
in
wish
those
they
days.
had pushed me,
Yeah.
more to go. But anyway, I was too young to know any better. That's how I met Harold.
So how long did you go together before you got married?
Well, this was about in April, probably around there somewhere that I met him. And in September we were married. And he took a job in Michigan. Iron Mountain, Michigan was his
And
first
then we-
teaching job. And he didn't want to go up there alone to teach. But we never had any disagreements except over getting married. He wanted to get married and I didn't. So, finally I gave in. And we spent our first 2 years in Michigan. He was a football coach of all sports at that time. And let's see if I can remember the salary. Well, around $2,000, I think, a year. And then the next 2 years we spent in Portage at $1,800 salary for the year.
Tough
And-
sledding, wasn't it?
Yes. And I used to make the remark that if we ever got $2,400 a year, $200 a month, we could live very well and have a few luxuries and all that. That was the remark I made back in those days.
Then the luxuries came along. And the expense.
Carol was born in Iron Mountain, Michigan, and Warren was born when we lived in Portage. Where is Warren?
He's laying down there.
I was going to say, up at the Pythian sisters, they had suppers every now and then, you know, and Aunt Mabel and Isabel. There was a lady up there by the name of Hildegard Williams that always cheated on food and everything when she'd have to bring something. And if there was anything left after the supper, she always wanted to take it home. So they fixed up a nice basket for her to take home. And when she got home, it was all the garbage. She never wanted anything anymore after that. They cooked her goose.
And your Grandpa Ed Rebholz?
Yeah.
He was a 32nd degree Mason.
Mason.
Is that
I
right?
want to know where Ed Rebholz fitted into all this. He was a 32nd degree Mason.
Yes, he was. My dad was a Mason, but he wasn't a 32nd. Norm was. Norm was a 32nd degree.
What was Grandpa Eddie's personality like?
What about
What
he?
was Ed's personality like? Mabel's Ed.
Oh,
Don't tell any
I can
secrets.
hear him say.
He got
Don't tell any secrets.
He didn't have the personality that Aunt Mabel had.
A
When my
different
mother, when she was first married to Ed, she'd get up on her rear, and Aunt Mabel would come over and stay at Mom and Dad's for a couple of days.
Yeah, he come over.
Is that right?
When I was a kid, Aunt Mabel would come over different times, and then Aunt Mabel always had.
But Aunt Mabel was, well,
Aunt Mabel had her own way all the
Yes,
time because
sir.
old Grandpa Rempel just loved Aunt Mabel, and she was a nice-looking woman, and well, Ed was a nice-looking man too, but Aunt Mabel was spoiled rotten.
she sure was.
Yeah, she was by Grandpa.
Yes.
My grandpa Rumpel.
And not only that, it made
Yeah.
it difficult for Ed. And he was a sweet guy.
Yeah, he had a better
He-
disposition.
And I often think we always talk about Grandma Mabel all the time, you know, when we reminisce, but we never say anything about Grandpa Ed.
Uncle Ed was a wonderful
He
uncle.
was a wonderful guy.
And we all, the men in the family always bought their clothes and everything there. Petey had a pair of overalls, bib overalls that he had until almost when we moved to, he still had them when we moved to Florida, and he didn't take them along. For years he had those bib overalls, and they were $1 a pair down to Uncle Ed's.
And Ed Rebholz was such a good guy that he would let anybody come into the store and buy things, a suit or two, and
never
put
paid
it
for
on
it.
the books, and he never got paid for it. And we still have the book in our basement with all those charges in it. So we could tell you even
Yeah.
now who owes him money yet.
You
And
didn't
he-
see
and he
my
had-
name on them.
I never looked.
I never looked.
You look. We always paid Uncle Ed, and I felt sorry that he had to work
He
so
was,
hard
he
and
was too good-hearted.
too
That's-
good-hearted
was
to
his
everybody. Everybody loved him, though. He was a good
problem. Oh,
man.
yes. And he had about $10,000 that people owed him in this book. And at that time, that was a lot
A lot of
money.
money.
And he never got it.
Never got it, no. And some of them, after they didn't pay once, I would have never let him, go. But he did. That's how they'd
Yeah.
come in and they say, "Oh, my wife died or my father died or something. I got to have a suit for a funeral."
Yeah.
Uncle Ed was so good, he'd give it to him. But Uncle Ed and Aunt Mabel had a car when the boys were young, because Harold used to fill that up with kids, and I was one of them. And we'd drive all around the city and just out. We never went too far out in the country. Turn around and we'd sing every song that you could, and that was popular at that time. The whole gang. Margaret was
That
in
must
on
be
that
where
too.
the singing got started in the family.
What can you remember about Mother and Dad's courtship? I know they met on a train, but when she came home and said she'd met Eddie, do you remember
Well,
anything about that?
Eddie, every now and then, Eddie would come up for a weekend, and and she introduced him, of course, to Petey and I, and we would get together. We'd maybe go to show. There always was a good theater in Portage, and we'd go to show together, and then to the Pig and Whistle, which was the ice cream parlor, and there were no taverns at that time because it was Prohibition, and so we would go to the Pig and Whistle, and we could dance in there if we wanted to, and they had anything you wanted to eat. It was just like a restaurant. and when then lots of times we'd go skating if it was in the winter time. We'd go skating up on the Fifth Ward Pond, and then we didn't have cars. We would walk down to the Pig and Whistle, which was a good mile and a half, and then Petey and I'd walk home another mile to the north end of town.
Well, after she'd met him, when she came home from that trip, did
Yeah.
she come and tell you right away she'd met this guy?
Yes,
on the train? What
yes,
did
she
tell
did.
You about it?
She told me about it, and then she she worked at the Wisconsin Power and Light Company for a while. You know, where same office where Petey had to go in after reading meters. She worked there, and then she worked up at the warehouse where the fellows were after work. And all the time she was writing to Eddie, and she told me all the time about Eddie, and then and of course and when she told me that he wanted her to marry him, I said, that's beautiful. I think you'll have a good life with Eddie because he was so good.
Tell us about Prohibition and what the fellows did when they couldn't buy liquor in the store.
Well,
They
I'll
got
tell
it
you,
somewhere, didn't
when
they?
they couldn't buy liquor at the stores, they went out in the country to the moonshiners.
Moonshiners.
And Uncle Harry Champlin, who was Aunt Mabel's brother, lived up at Linden Station, and he knew of the best moonshiners in the world. And so the guys would get up there, they'd go up to Linden and see Uncle Harry, and he'd take them out to the, I forgot the name, was Havy on one of them, Havy's and their moonshine. And I never got to a moonshine place. I never cared for any kind of drinks or anything at that time. You know, I wouldn't take a drink. There was years that I wouldn't take a drink because I wasn't brought up to have any liquor in our house.
What about Petey?
Petey folks made their own beer
And
and wine and root beer. And I remember Casey opening a bottle of the root beer, and he went whoosh, it went right up his face to the ceiling in Grandma's kitchen. But Grandma made the delicious grape wine. It was delicious. I often wish that we'd have had the recipe for that. And then she made the white,
elderberry. They made
elderberry, the white blossoms of the elderberry. But the only liquor they didn't have beer at the house either. Very often, that she made more wine than she did beer. But Grandpa made the beer, I think. But Grandma made the wine. And when we go, we always have a little glass of wine at the table.
When's the first time you ever had German green beans?
First time I ever had what?
German green beans at Eddie and Mabel's.
The kind they used to cook with the ham and navy beans.
Oh, yes.
The-
I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that. The first time I had that. I never was too fond of that.
That was
When they
one of
told
my
me-
favorite meals.
When they told me the first time I had them,
That
they were
was
10
good
years
stuff.
old.
Did you
I
ever
thought,
have that,
oh,
Bob?
I needed something else.
I loved her German potato salad. I liked her German potato
I
salad.
still have some beans, German beans in my basement right now. They're going to explode any day.
Oh, you better take them out, Gladys.
They've been there for, maybe 10 years.
I'd throw them out.
Oh, they should be, but I haven't got the courage to carry them upstairs.
Just put it in your garbage.
They smell too much.
Used to run over to
Well,
Brower's
have the
store
boys
and
take
get
them
those
to the dump.
peanuts.
Yes.
Brower's peanuts, he'd roast it.
Roasted?
Because if
Peanut
that
store
blows
across
up,
the street from
you'll
Maine.
wish you had done it.
I know.
For a few pennies, you could get a nice little
What
bag
were-
of Spanish
what were
peanut
some of the
salad,
nicknames
and hot and salty and
Of people.
Oh,
garbage in on that. And
Uncle Addison was High Pockets.
Sweet bottle?
That was
Oh, the
his
bottling
nickname.
company, Bottles of soda?
There were so many nicknames. Everybody had a nickname, even me. I was Rosey. I never was called Hazel. I was Rosey even through high school.
What was
Yeah.
Where
Margaret?
did you get that?
Maggie.
I had a red coat, I had a red coat, and I used to peddle papers, you know, and I had a red winter coat, and a fellow by the name of Tuts Good Connect, he called me Rosey, and that went right away. I was Rosey all the way, and Petey was Petey Red Apple. He had such rosy cheeks,
Yeah.
so he called him Petey Red Apple. So that's how Petey got his name, Petey, is because, and the same guy named Petey that called me Rosie. Well, all my teachers even called me Rosie in high school.
Well, I think I saw some pictures in Mother's photograph albums.
And
there's
Margaretta
Rosie
was always
written on it.
Maggie.
Yeah, she was Maggie.
I don't remember seeing Rosie, but
Well, I do. I remember seeing the word. In fact, I think it was in one of those books I took out.
And
to
we had a
Scott
gang
one day.
in the spring. Your mother and I and a bunch of the guys, before we were married, always went roller skating. You know, I bet the neighbors could have killed me. I was always up at 5 o'clock roller skating. I loved roller skating and I loved ice skating.
Gee, you'd be a good, what is this, inline skating?
inline
now?
skating, she could do that.
You'd be good at that,
Oh,
Hazel.
I wish I could.
Good.
Was
Tie
there,
a pillow on my butt.
was there somebody named Rubber Jaw? What?
Robert Jaw Woodman, yes,
Yeah, who was
he was
he?
on there. He was a railroader, and oh my land, I'd have to. I maybe will think of those and I'll write them down. There's a lot of them that I can remember. The old railroaders always had a nickname for everybody.
Did Harold Sr. have a nickname? Because Russ was Das, right?
Das.
Das, but how about Harold?
Just Hal, I think. I don't remember
Or
that he
Ralph?
ever had any other
I
nickname.
don't think I ever heard of it.
No.
Well, how did
Red.
Petey become Petey?
That same fellow that called me Rosie named him Petey.
Oh.
He had such rosy
Okay, with
cheeks,
the okay.
and they called him Petey Red Apple. And it was.
But what is Petey Red Apple? I never heard
They
of
had
it.
just like red apples on his cheeks. He had such rosy cheeks.
Was that the goopnik that lived up there on
On the corner.
by Albert Street?
Yeah,
and
and lived right there. There were 3 of them that lived there. Alma and Fred and
I
Tuts.
remember.
What was
Yeah.
our father like
Delivered her paper.
when he was younger?
Harold?
Yeah, Harold.
Well, he was great.
Great.
Great, I liked him.
Was he in trouble at all?
Not that I ever knew of. No, he used to have his dad chase him around the dining room table once in a while. He'd never stop. When my grandma, I was 10 years old when my grandma Champlin died, and we all went up to the funeral. And after the funeral, Aunt Mabel and Mother wanted to stay up there and help Grandpa. So my dad and Harold and Russ and myself and Amber and Ben and Norman came home on the train. Well, Harold got mad at one of the boys for something, and he went down the road about a half a block from our house. We lived on the corner where the Lutheran school is in Portage, and he threw bricks. My dad came out and he said, "That'll be the end of that, Harold. I don't want any more bricks on." Harold kept on throwing bricks. And of course Harold was just a little bit older than I. And Dad took off after him. Dad was a real athlete, you know. He and his 6 brothers used to box and everything up in the barn at their house. Mother went to work for Grandma Stowers when she was 11 years old. She went out, left her home and went to work. My mother never had any more than 4th grade education. But she worked there for Grandma Stowers, and then when she was 21, she married Dad. And Dad, and of course, and his brothers were great athletes, all of them. Well, anyway, my dad took after him, and he started running up the hill toward Aunt Mabel's house. Well, Dad caught him. Dad caught him. He brought him back. Did he ever give him a lecture? And from that day forward, Harold thanked Uncle Bernie 1,000 times for giving him a lecture. he thought a lot of my dad. And he just straightened him right out.
Yeah, and he was a.
But Ed couldn't straighten him out like that. He'd run away from Ed.
Sounds familiar.
I got a guy like that.
Yeah,
used to
just
do
like
that
his
too.
youngest
I
son.
got a guy that used to do that too.
Who is that?
Warren.
Warren.
Oh,
Harold would stand there and take it. I took off. He's got a PhD. I only have a master's degree.
oh. I don't have either one.
Hazel, how far in school did Pearl and her sister go in elementary school? Did they go to elementary school in Linden Station?
They were up at Linden Station. Mother only went to 4th grade, and she had to go out and make her own living. And Aunt Mabel, you see, was 7 years younger than my mother, so she was still
7 years.
she was still there at 4. I never knew how she went to school, but
Did Pearl ever go to high school? No, she
no,
only went to
4th
4th
grade.
grade.
She had to go to work.
Did-
And Aunt Mabel, of course, stayed until she came to Portage to work when she was probably 17 or 18 years old, and she stayed at our house with Mother. And she learned to be a seamstress like her mother was. My grandma was a seamstress and a good one. And Aunt Mabel learned how to sew, so Aunt Mabel always sewed clothes for me.
Okay.
Mother never got to be a good sewer.
Did they have a high school in Linden Station?
No.
Okay.
Where was
They have one now.
Yeah.
No, Aunt Mabel never went to high school
Yeah.
because she came down to Portage to. She might have been 16 when she
Yeah.
came to Portage and went to work.
Okay.
She worked in the store downtown. That's how she met Ed.
Did Ed Rebholz go to high school?
Now I don't know. I don't think so.
I remember vaguely that he did not go.
I don't think he did.
Yeah. So Harold.
Harold, in those days, the first job you could get, he went in the store to help his dad.
Yeah. Now.
The first job you could get, you took it.
Yeah. Ed was a carpenter at one point because there were an awful lot of carpenter's tools that he had in his home. Did he work on the bridge over the Wisconsin River to replace it, to help replace it with a new wooden bridge?
He might have.
Yeah.
It got blown away
Right.
in a big storm at one time, and I didn't have any memory of that. That was before I was. That was around 1909 or something like that, and I was only 2 years old. I didn't have any. I never heard him talk about it.
Oh, okay.
But Aunt Mabel, she used to come over to our house. I can remember.
How was Bob when he was a youngster?
He was a good boy.
Good boy. What do you mean, good boy?
Well, we never had a problem with him. He was a very quiet boy.
Studious kid.
As a little boy, he had his rocking chair. When we'd have company, he'd sit in that rocking chair and listen to us talk.
Just
See
like
that
he's
Hazel
doing now.
He loved to listen to the radio, and he took in all the things on the radio. And on Saturday, Petey would read the Sunday school lesson to him, and he'd be listening to the radio, at the same time. And so Petey said to me, he won't know a word I read. So after he got through, he questioned him. He knew it all. And he also heard his thing on the radio.
That's why
what happens
he
when
was a
that's
good-
all we got to
So you
do?
could do two things at once, right?
Good
Bob?
student in school.
All the way, good student. All the way.
Nice.
I wasn't so good a student.
You weren't?
No,
You know, I don't like to hear you say that, Warren. You were a good student.
no, I wasn't.
Oh, excuse me.
Well, Bob was a good
He
student
wants
all
to
the
make a
way.
better
I
story.
remember that.
And when he was in high school, they
Then-
wanted him on the football team. Well, he went out for 3 weeks, the football team, and the woman that the woman teacher was a woman teacher that had the debate team, wasn't it?
That's Kelly, yeah.
Yeah, and she wanted him on the debate team.
Didn't he go to Badger Boys State?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was.
Yes,
That's what
he
I thought.
did.
That's what I remember.
I also went to work for J.C. Penney because I needed to have some spending.
Yes, he went to work for J.C. Penney's and worked there every Saturday night. I still got a blanket that he got there.
But you worked in the canteen.
35 cents an hour.
Yeah, big money, right?
Didn't Bob work in the can? Didn't you work in the canning
Three-
factory?
Oh,
Yes,
sure, every
three-
summer in the
three
canning
summers.
factory.
You were a
Three summers.
cooker down there, weren't you?
I was head cook for
Down at
Poinette.
Poinette. I stacked cases in the warehouse. I wasn't very smart.
well, I started the first year I was in the
He,
warehouse.
he worked wherever he could get a nickel.
Yes,
2
degree.
years I was in the cooker.
You know, who was the guy that he really had problems and drank a lot? What was his name that worked down there and was all scarred up later in life from fights and everything? What was his name?
I don't
Where?
remember.
In from Portage here, you remember? Oh, he used to come in Grandpa's store.
Oh, you're not talking
Rufus
about
Lewis.
Rufus.
Oh, Rufus, yeah. Rufus, yeah.
Oh, Rufus
I
would
felt-
sleep in Grandpa's store many
Yeah.
nights
I
Yeah.
felt
on the
sorry
table
for
in the
Rufus.
back room. He slept in Ed would let him sleep in there.
He was like a street person, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yes, he'd get arrested every fall and be in the coop all winter. And then he'd get out in the spring and then have a good time all summer, and then he'd get arrested in the fall and go in the coop all winter.
I remember Rufus.
No,
I
he
felt
was a
sorry.
homely. He was the homeliest guy.
Well, he was all scarred up because
Yeah,
of a lot
he
of
was.
fights and.
Yes, he could
Yeah.
fight too. He was a tough.
But I think I remember Dad saying the reason that he
He drank.
drank was that he had a love affair that.
Irene Leader, who lived 2 houses from Grandma
Leader.
Red Kohls, she lived Liz right next to Liz and Shorty,
Yeah.
going toward
Yeah,
town.
yeah,
And
right.
she was a beautiful girl, and he wanted to marry her. Well, she didn't want any part of him. He was a scoundrel, you know. And that just made it all the worse for him, and he never had a decent job or anything all his life. He loved her.
Unrequited
I
love.
always felt
Yeah.
sorry for you.
Yeah.
Didn't
I don't even
She's
remember
still
when he
alive
died.
too. She's still alive.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
guess she is.
Evelyn
I
worked-
don't remember when he died though. Did they
Rufus?
find him somewhere? Yeah, dead.
I don't remember either, Gladys,
Can't
but it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And Evelyn Leader worked for Dr. Taylor
Think
in
that's
the
enough?
office, you know.
Well, that's another indication of
Listen,
Ed
got one of
Rebholz's
opportunities.
hospitality or helping people
That's
out
right.
who were less fortunate and didn't have something. Just like I can remember Mabel used to feed people who came in on the train and would walk up to 631 Prospect
Yeah.
and ask for a handout,
Something.
and she always had
So did
something.
my mother.
Yeah.
My mother never turned a bum away.
Yeah.
Never.
That was a thing at that time, though.
Oh, sure.
Bums would come to the door.
Depression
Yeah.
was
They'd
on.
come up to
Depression
the
years.
annex there.
Depression was on. Depression was on.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Depression was on, but you didn't hear. It's 10 times worse today than it was then. The way they come and kill you and rob you and everything else down in Florida. Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah, I think the people back then, when times were hard, they were glad to get anything you'd give them, and they weren't out to hurt you. You know.
No, they
were
weren't. They weren't.
It was
They
a
just
different
they were
mindset.
hungry.
Yeah.
They were hungry. My mother never turned one away. And whenever one of the neighbors would lose somebody in the family, or when somebody got killed on the railroad, my dad always had to go and tell the woman that her husband got killed or hurt or something. They always that was his job at the railroad too. He could do it in such a nice, kind way, and he had all the funeral services for the Masons, and he could tell people that. Then my mother would bake a big lemon pie. I can see him now. Lemon pie and a loaf of bread, and that would go over to the house where the person got killed or something there. And when Dad was on the railroad, the poor little kids at that time, they would sit along the curbing up at La Crosse when these railroad men would get off. My dad would give them all a nickel to buy an ice cream cone. And he felt so good about that. He loved to do that.
Yeah.
And then there was Norman, who would say, I can't understand why my dad didn't have more money than he had.
Did you smoke a pipe based on or influenced by your grandpa?
Both my grandpas.
Yeah.
Both grandpas.
Because I remember Uncle Bernie always smoking
both
a
of
pipe.
And
Yeah,
so did
I was-
Grandpa
Right.
Kohls.
Grandpa
Sure,
Kohls
I
used
I
to
didn't
smoke
know.
a pipe.
Okay, I didn't know.
Both of them did.
And Bob's little grandson, that little,
Yeah, they want to smoke my pipes every time they come up.
yeah. Bob puts it in their mouth and takes their picture.
They gotta have, where's the pipe, Grandpa, where's the pipe?
I remember Uncle Bernie.
You have to teach them all these good
Those
things.
two little guys of Hollies, they're sure cute.
You gotta have it.
And that one, he could ride a two-wheel bike when he was 2 years old. Carter.
Oh,
He
yeah.
rode the two-wheel bike down in Florida just like nothing. Petey had a bike and I had a bike, because we used to ride the whole park every night after supper in Norman, Virginia, and Petey and I, that was just about 2 miles around the whole park, and we used to do that every night after supper. And
Gee, I never had a bike.
I sold mine for
I had a little red
$65.
wagon.
Well, I had Casey's old hand-me-down, remember, that's.
the
Yes,
best I
I
could
said
do.
you never had a new one either.
No, that's the
I
only
didn't-
bike I ever had.
I
was
didn't
Casey's.
either. I always wanted a new bike, and I never got a
He
new bike.
bought
I
that-
never did either. We were cheated
You always
somewhere.
And I wanted a horse, and I never had a horse. And there's my horse over there.
Bob, I never had a new
Work
bike
horse,
either. I had
yeah.
to ride my sister's 8-year-old
Oh, sure,
bike.
there you
Yeah,
go.
I never
Yeah.
had a new bike
We
either.
never
Something
had a
about
new
Oh, I
older
never had
sisters.
one either.
Haven't you run out of things?
Look at Joanne.
Well, I got a new bike when I was in 3rd grade, and my new bike has been reconditioned, and it is here at Swan Lake. If anybody wants to ride my vintage Schwinn,
But is it new?
it's new to me. It was new then.
Yeah.
Back in
A
about
Schwinn
What
even.
would that be?
well, let's see. If I was in 3rd grade, how old was I?
About 9.
But I'll
About
tell you,
9. It would be
Joanne,
about
your mother
1946,
and I
1947 in there.
had a wonderful life together. And it's too bad your dad had to die so young.
Well, he could hardly wait to retire,
I know it.
because he always said that, and he was going to enjoy it, because he always knew these guys who waited till they were 65 and retired, and they were dead a year afterwards,
Yeah.
and he could just hardly wait to do this, and he was going to have himself a good time.
Yeah.
Well, 2
And he
years
died
later,
when he was
gone.
67.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I can't believe that yet when Karen,
What
I
did
think it
he,
was you
what
that
did he
called.
die of? A heart?
Heart attack.